So let's give a basic summary of various contemporary approaches to psychology. And these are ways in which psychologists can kind of understand the world around them, different approaches they can take to really understand behavior and mental processes. So you can have a biological approach, a behavioral approach, psychodynamic approach, humanistic approach, cognitive approach, evolutionary approach, and a sociocultural approach. So when you think about a biological approach, the field of neuroscience is the study of the nervous system. The nervous system is obviously the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, but this continues out all the way throughout our body. How information is sent from one point to another in our body is through the nervous system. And so they look at the structure of the nervous system. So they look at the structure, say the neuron, the axons, the cell bodies, the dendrites, all of these various aspects of the nervous system. We also look at the function of the nervous system, the function of the neuron, for example, how it works, what it does. And so this clearly is a very important way of understanding behavior and mental processes, of understanding what's underlying it. We also understand how our nervous system develops. So when you think about the infancy, how we have changes in our brain that help us cope with the environment, that occur as we grow. So these are important things that neuroscientists study. And so the biological approach to psychology is one that really focuses on answering questions about behavior and mental processes through the study of neuroscience. So remember, like for example, we talked about sadness. There's a mental process, right? Well, you can take a biological approach to understanding sadness. What might be going on in a sad person's nervous system? What might be going on in their hormones? What might be going on with their blood pressure? These are questions you could ask taking a neuroscientist approach to something like sadness. Also, a biological approach looks at genetics, and that's an important factor. Really understanding how if you look at parents and how genes get passed on from the parents to their children, maybe they're looking at various kinds of psychological disorders, let's say like schizophrenia, and looking at is there a genetic basis to it? Or they may be looking at a genetic basis to personality, for example. What makes somebody more extrovert, more outgoing? Is it something that could be genetic? Biochemistry is another important aspect of this field. They're looking at what chemicals might be involved in certain kinds of mental processes and behaviors. For example, we talked about sadness, remember? Well, there's a certain neurotransmitter in the brain called serotonin, which is very important in terms of regulating mood. People who have depression have a reduced level of serotonin activity in their brains, which it may be a cause, it may be a effect, it may just be a factor in depression. The bottom line is certainly one way of looking at depression is kind of looking at the brain chemistry, for example. Okay. So the brain is the physical basis of all of our thoughts and emotions. That's the center of our nervous system there. There's still so many different things that we have yet to learn about the brain. Now, a behavioral approach is looking at our observable behavior. They're looking at the environmental determinants of our behavior. And according to a behavioral approach, if you want to change behavior, you can make changes to the environment that would make certain behaviors more or less likely to occur. And as a result, you can learn a lot and you can change behavior based on controlling the environment. They don't like thinking about, they don't like discussing thought. because a thought is not directly observed. So they're really only looking at observable behaviors. The radical behaviorists really don't even want to talk about stuff like motivation and stuff like that. They're really interested in what can be observed, what can be directly observed, what can be tested. You can change the environment and see how you can change the environment and see if it has an effect on behavior, so that you can change behavior through changing in the environment. So these are things that behavioralists look at. So some of the notable behaviors that we'll be talking about in this course include Ivan Pavlov, John Watson, and B.F. Skinner here. And the picture here, the father and mother and baby here, the father here is B.F. Skinner, and there's Skinner's very happy-looking daughter. And basically, he did something very unusual. He created an environment, a special kind of crib, you could say, an enclosed crib that was temperature controlled, that had the ability where the child could essentially get whatever it needed. He could get food, he could get toys to play with. It was kind of like an environment where the child can control what is going on. Kind of a radical idea of putting your child into like this kind of a special cage in which the child can, get whatever its needs satisfied. Again, that's an idea of really radically controlling the environment. But it turned out she turned out okay. She became an artist, I believe. So it wasn't like I don't think he ruined her for life for that. But certainly an interesting look at psychology to study B.F. Skinner. The psychodynamic approach is an approach taken by, started by Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, he was a physician, and he was noticing that a number of his patients had symptoms that really had no physiological cause. So he decided to try to investigate what might be going on, what might be causing these particular symptoms. And so he developed what is called psychoanalysis. And this is a procedure in which he would talk to you about what might be going on. He'd talk to you, getting in-depth understanding of what might be the roots of a person's behavior. Asking the person about their childhood, asking the person about what they're thinking about, making word associations, doing those kind of things in psychoanalysis to try to dig down deep. The idea behind it is he believed that a lot of what guides our behavior is in our unconscious thought. It's in our unconscious. We're not consciously aware of it, but it's nevertheless affecting us. So, for example, those symptoms that he mentioned about from his patients, he argued that they didn't know why they had those symptoms, but there was an unconscious factor that was causing them to have these symptoms. They may not have been consciously aware of it, but it was in their unconscious. And the idea of the psychoanalysis is to try to dig down deep, find out what kind of memories, what kind of experiences have you had in the past that you pushed out of your consciousness that might be affecting you, that might be affecting your behavior. And with psychoanalysis, there's a conflict between the drive that you have, your biological drives and the demands of your society. So, for example, and we have often felt this as well. Our body wants something, but we have to kind of hold ourselves back and say, wait a minute, we can't have that now. We're going to get ourselves into trouble. If you want that brand new car, you don't just break into the car and steal it. You have to work hard and make enough money, so you can perhaps buy the car, but you can't just take whatever you want whenever you want it. So that's the conflict that we're having, is how we cope with our environment has to do with trying to deal with these urges that we have in an effective way. And finally, this approach, the psychodynamic or psychoanalytic approach, really takes childhood experiences very important. Now, your experiences as a child have an enormous effect on you in terms of how you cope with the world around you. Stuff like, for example, being weaned too early, for example, or weaned too late, maybe, or perhaps going through some bad experiences during diaper training. All of this are important factors, according to the psychoanalytic approach, that might lead to explain a lot of what is going on in adult behavior. The humanistic approach is quite different from the psychoanalytic approach and the behavioral approach. They focus on positive human qualities, reaching your potential, and very much the field of positive psychology is directly rooted in the humanistic approach. The idea is that we all have the capacity to become the best that we can be. We have free will. We have the ability to make choices. With Skinner and the radical behaviorists, they were more poo-pooing free will. They were saying it's the environment that guides our behavior, and it's not something that's internal. But the humanistic approach says that these are internal, and it's conscious, it's not unconscious. We have the conscious ability to make decisions, to improve our lives, to make choices. And this is essentially what's going on. Now, if we make choices that go against what we know is right and what we know is good, then we'll have certain problems. But nevertheless, free will is important to the humanistic approach. A couple of the notable humanistic theorists are Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow, and we'll talk more about them in a later chapter in the textbook, the chapter on personality. A cognitive approach takes the idea that studying our mental processes and studying how they work. The cognitive psychologists often take an information processing approach. We take in information from the environment, we process it mentally, and then we produce output in terms of our behaviors, the things that we do. So they are studying the mental processes. So they study mental processes like memory, like learning, like reaction time, for example. These are things that cognitive psychologists are interested in. They're interested in how our mind works. What are the processes underlying it? How we interpret this information, how we process it, how we... The evolutionary approach is an approach that is really looking at the adaptive characteristics of our behavior. How have our behaviors evolved over time to help us survive and help us reproduce? So oftentimes evolutionary psychologists are often looking at animal research to link with human behavior, kind of looking at what animals do and then comparing it to what is done with humans. And they're also looking at human behavior and kind of analyzing human behavior and saying, well, how are these behaviors, how are these strategies that humans have taken, how has that been adapted, how has that helped them survive versus different kinds of behaviors, different kinds of strategies? How do we adapt to the environment and survive? How do we go about reproducing? Reproduction is an important part of what it means to be human. We need to be able to reproduce, pass our genes on to the next generation. If we're unable to do that, then our species would die off. And of course, natural selection, which is what Darwin talked about, applies to human beings as well, with certain kinds of characteristics that are conducive to survival. How do we cope with environmental changes? There are certain kinds of characteristics, behaviors, mental processes that might be more conducive to survival that allow us to cope with environmental changes. So one of the most well-known evolutionary psychologists is David Buck. I believe he's over at the University of Texas at Austin. And he's written a whole lot on evolutionary psychology. A sociocultural approach takes a look, as opposed to the evolutionary approach, takes a look at how our cultures are shaping our behavior and how we are our behavior and mental practice is very much culturally determined. Whether you grew up in China versus whether you grew up in the United States can have an enormous impact on how you cope with the world around you and how you think and how you behave. We look at differences from one culture to another. They look at differences between different ethnic groups, different cultural groups. Sociocultural approach looks at that. They look at it both within countries as well as across countries as well, from one country to another. So let's explore this a little bit further. Psychologists have kind of categorized cultures into two basic types: individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures. In individualistic cultures, individuals see themselves as unique and distinct. We want to be the best. We want to be different. We want to be special. So the United States really fits into the concept, into the individualistic point of view. We certainly value independence. We want our freedom. We want to be able to make decisions on our own. We don't want to have to be beholden to anybody else. We value this independence. We value our liberty. This is characteristic of an individualistic culture. But collectivistic cultures take a quite different point of view. The social group and the individual within it, that's what's important. In other words, your individual behavior is based on your role within the group, and that is how you should be monitoring your behavior, as to be serving the group that you're in rather than serving yourself. And they value interdependence rather than independence. They value what is good for your group, what is good for your family, what is good for your particular social group that you identify with. That is the collectivist culture. And as you can see, it's kind of a different approach. Liberty is less important. It's more important about, being true to your group. So, for example, if you think about it, what do you think is the worst character for? Being a doormat or being selfish and mean? Well, an individualistic person might look at someone who is conforming to their group, who is listening to what other people are telling them to do, and then I see that person as a doormat. But in a collectivist culture, that may be considered normal behavior. While a person who perhaps leaves his family business and goes off to become a musician and move out and do his own thing and wave goodbye to mom and dad. Well, a collectivist person might see that person as being selfish and mean, taking care of your own interests rather than the needs of your family. So you can see how behaviors might be perceived differently based on your two cultures, and how your own ideas about what is right and wrong are going to be very much culturally dependent and it's going to guide the choices you make. So there's been a lot of research on comparing individualistic versus collectivist subjects from different cultures. So, for example, in the United States, Western Europe is more individualistic. Eastern Europe, India, China, Japan, much more collectivist. Individualistic subjects has been found prefer to work on tasks that they've had success with. They want to see signs of their success. They want to show that they are successful, and that again reflects, the view of yourself is that is what you want to do. You want to show that you're successful. Okay. Collectivist subjects, though, they want to work on tasks they may have difficulty with. They want to get better. They want to be able to, work on that. They're emphasizing their hard work, and they criticize themselves rather than boosting themselves up. And again, that might reflect the difference there between kind of looking out for numero uno in the individualistic culture versus kind of like working hard for the group, let's say, in a collectivist culture. So would you rather work on a hobby that's easy for you or one that's difficult? Well, maybe the individualist might prefer something that is easy, that they can show that they're being successful. On the other hand, you might collectivists might prefer something that's a bit more difficult. But again, that's not going to be true for everybody. In fact, people who have a high need for achievement, who want to get the best grades and whatnot, these individuals actually, their ideal paths are things that are difficult but doable. They don't want to have something that is too difficult. They want to have something that is difficult but has a good chance for success. They want to be able to say, I worked hard and got this done. Okay? I took this difficult class and got an A. But you're not going to take an impossible class where the best you can hope for is a C. You're going to take something that you can work hard to get an A in, and you can be proud that you got an A in it. But you're not going to take something that's too difficult. And you're not going to take basket weaving 101 because, anybody with a pulse could get an A in that, presumably. So that's a different kind of mindset.